Everything.
The Honest Truth with Benito Bergatini. Smile 90.4 FM.
Joining us this evening to analyze the online sentiment, the online conversations around land expropriation, examining how potentially misinformation can fuel division on the ground, is the head of research at the Center for Analytics and Behavioral Change, Yosibel Chetty. Yosibel, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Good evening, Benito, and thank you so much for having us.
An absolute pleasure. So what are the findings of the reports, just looking at these online conversations about the expropriation bill?
So there's quite a few broad level results, but what I'd like to look at in particular are the topics as well as the peaks in conversation, as well as some of the authors that we uncovered during this report. So the peaks in conversation that we saw were on the 24th of January, which is when Cyril Ramaphosa signed the expropriation bill. And the next peak that we saw was on the 3rd of February when Donald Trump threatened action against South Africa and when Donald Trump and Elon Musk decided to get involved in this conversation. So the conversation about expropriation that was sitting somewhere near zero around the 20th of January suddenly jumped up to 125,000 posts on the 3rd of February. So that's a massive spike for the researchers on my team to have picked up on, and obviously something that piques our interest and makes us want to look into it further. Looking through these peaks, the topics that were mostly spoken about were about race, reparation, and equity.
And what was being said around race, reparation, and equity? How were they? What was the engagements around those topics like?
So a lot of the sentiment that we were seeing online was a sort of anti-expropriation bill. And this is obviously social media, and Twitter, in fact, represents a very small part of the population. There's always something to keep in mind when reading through these stats. But accounts that were in opposition to the signing of the bill likened it to Zimbabwe's land reform policies under the late Robert Mugabe, and other people were accusing the South African government of targeting white farmers.
Who were the authors of these engagements?
So thank you so much for asking that question, because I think that that's what's really important. So the report is available on our website, cabc.org.za. And I think it's really important for the South African public to go and find this report and to engage with it carefully, because looking at the authors was quite a large focus for us. And what the researchers who worked on this piece, what they looked at was who was driving this sort of 125,000 posts that were coming through, and how were they being driven? So what they found is two kinds of authors. So you have your authors who don't really have much of a following, but they were hitting it in large volumes. So acting as amplifiers, or to use a phrase that some of our colleagues, Professor Herman Wasserman from the School of Media and Journalism at Stellenbosch, as well as Kyle Findlay and Aldo Cornelison from Murmur, is the term buzzers. So a buzzer is actually an Indonesian phrase that explains this kind of social media behavior. Small accounts that are paid to just go off or perhaps not paid, maybe that's not the right word. You know, we have to be very careful when we're talking about this topic of disinformation and misinformation. But a buzzer is essentially an account that will go and push out content at mass, reposting, liking, making it seem that this content is more popular than it actually is. And then on the other hand of that, you get these accounts that are large accounts that have built a following, and they have millions of followers. And they don't rely on pushing out lots of little content. They rely on getting engagement to their posts based on the size of their followership. So one of the accounts in particular that even Elon Musk reposted is called Visegrad 24. So I'm not sure if you've seen it, but on South African social media, but it has been popping up quite a lot recently. And an example of Visegrad's posts that we found was one saying South African farmers are in grave danger now that the expropriation bill has been signed into law. Land can now be confiscated with no compensation if it is deemed to be for the public purpose in the public interest. So that's not false. But once you look to how it's positioned amongst other information, and then who is reposting it and how that is going on to be used, becomes quite important. Something else to mention is that this Visegrad 24 account, their branding is set up to look very much like Media 24. So that is something for people that I would like to point out for people to really pay attention to. It's where this news source is. And I think once you click through to do some research into Visegrad is actually a Polish word, Hungarian, which means the upper castle. And looking through the Visegrad site, was quite interesting for me because what I found is that they are there's a sign that runs across the bottom of their page that says donate now and your donations are 100% tax deductible. And directly above that banner, I can see what looks like a news story on what appears to be Media 24 branding that says why a Zulu now supports Oranya's self-determination, as well as other very conservative kind of stories about South Africa. And then when you dig a little bit further, you start asking the question, well, okay, if I was subscribed to Media 24, or if I was subscribed to Daily Maverick, those are not tax deductible donations. So what kind of a news organization is this? And when you scratch it just a little bit deeper, you see that it's actually a US-based Section 5013C non-profit organization in the States that's being run by a Polish South African and a Polish American. And where we sit at the CABC, when we look at this stuff, is we start asking the questions is who stands to benefit? What are they benefiting from in putting out the kind of content that they do and in trying to generate revenue as they are?
Interesting that we have the global north jumping into these conversations. And yes, what do they gain from it is an important question. How does it impact upon the narrative?
Yeah. So, what does the global north stand to receive, as well as, what kind of reactions are they waiting for from South Africa is such an important one. And it's played out quite interestingly, or it is playing out quite interestingly in South Africa, because I don't know about you, but when I go onto my news stream in the morning, I'm just seeing a lot of doom and gloom about South Africa. And then right next to it, there's a lot of information. And it almost feels like we're in a confusing information overload kind of environment. And there's a lot of fear mongering that takes place. But within this confusing sort of space where lots of information is presented, we are lacking the deliberation that's needed to actually engage critically with the information that we're viewing and consider what's going on here in front of us. So, for example, quite soon after Donald Trump had posted what he did about South Africa on the 3rd of February, there was a circulation of a video of President Cyril Ramaphosa laughing, and saying, well, what does Trump have to do with South African land? And when I saw that being circulated, I started to look everywhere on the internet, because given how our president and how our government has decided to respond, it didn't seem like it quite fitted. So when actually somebody else sent me the information to say this was part of a video from 2018 that has now been repurposed and pushed within South African mainstream social media to look as though this is how South Africa is responding, and like laughing and not taking it very seriously. And that's another sort of narrative that we see playing up, is we are not serious as a country, keeps coming up within the narratives that we check.
What do you think, Josabel, then lastly would be the danger of not having that deliberation, of not being able to engage critically with the type of information, misinformation that is being shared?
Well, the threat is really that you're going to have people who are angry. So this kind of content is designed to elicit emotional responses from people. And one of those emotions that is played into quite heavily is fear. So there's two things I think that people need to constantly be aware of, and that is, how does this make me feel? And why is it making me feel like this, before you hit like, repost, or reshare? Just to consider those things. And then to also just think that accounts that you see that have official check marks on social media, it doesn't actually mean that those are accounts that you can hold to proper accounts through legal means. So, for example, this Visegrad account that I've mentioned before, they have a golden check mark on their account on Twitter. And if you look at why a golden check mark is given, it's because it indicates that the account is an official organization, that it has been that's been gone through verified organizations, very little information given to you, something that seems to be afforded to you based on how Twitter wants to give you that marking on your account. So it's important to be very careful of of whose information you are promoting, as well as to pay attention to the feelings that you have when you see the kind of content. And there's something that I want to maybe end on, because I know I don't have too much time with you, but I think it's something really important that Professor Herman Wasserman, who is a white Afrikaans man who is speaking to all of these topics also, he says it is doubtful that Trump really knows or cares that much about South African farmers in particular. It is instead a cynical move to energizing his right-wing base with a racialized narrative, casting himself as the defender of embattled white people against a supposedly vengeful black majority.
That seems to be the playbook, yes.
Yes, that is the playbook. So don't get sucked into that playbook. I think as South Africans, pick your head up from your phone and look around you. You know, take a drive to Franschhoek. Take a drive to, not even that far, take a drive to Campsvale and Dudno. Have a look at where does ownership actually lie? What is the reality versus what is the alternative reality that is being presented by the people who own and run these social media platforms?
Head of Research at the Center for Analytics and Behavioral Change, Josabel Chetty, appreciate your time and for elaborating upon this latest report. Do have a look at it. It's important to engage with it, cabc.org.za. Josabel, thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Benito. Yeah, I think it's a lot that I've been wanting to get off my chest for a little bit, and I'm so grateful that we have this report that the public can look to make sense of what's going on.
Keeping your geyser running 24/7 just for hot water is costing you